On the morning of January 15th, 1947, a young mother walked her child along a vacant lot in the Leimert Park neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. In the overgrown grass off Norton Avenue, she spotted what looked like a discarded store mannequin lying in two pieces. When she stepped closer, she realized the terrible truth. It was not a mannequin. It was the severed, mutilated body of a 22-year-old woman. Her torso was completely cut in two at the waist, her body scrubbed clean, and her face carved into a haunting, artificial smile. Within hours, local newspapers blasted the story across front pages nationwide. The victim became known to history as the Black Dahlia. Her murder sparked one of the largest, most expensive, and most frustrating homicide investigations in American history. More than 7 decades later, despite thousands of interviews and hundreds of suspects, her case officially remains unsolved. The victim behind the tragic headlines was Elizabeth Short. She was born on July 29, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts, and grew up in the nearby suburb of Medford. She was the middle of 5 daughters raised by her mother, Phoebe Short, after her father, Cleo Short, deserted the family during the Great Depression. Elizabeth suffered from severe asthma and bronchitis as a child. To help her lungs, her mother sent her to winter in Florida, where she developed a love for warm weather, movies, and independence. In late 1942, after learning that her father was living in California, 18-year-old Elizabeth moved west to join him in Vallejo. Their relationship quickly deteriorated, and Elizabeth spent the next several years moving between California, Massachusetts, and Florida. She worked temporary jobs as a waitress, a cashier, and a clerk at a military post exchange in Lompoc, California. During World War II, Elizabeth met Major Matthew Gordon, Jr., an Army Air Forces officer. Historical records and letters show that the two formed a close bond, and Elizabeth later told friends they were engaged. However, Major Gordon was killed in an airplane crash in India in August 1945, leaving Elizabeth heartbroken. By late 1946, drawn by the glamour of Hollywood, Elizabeth moved to Los Angeles, working odd jobs and staying with friends in hotels or in cheap rooming houses. In early January 1947, Elizabeth Short was living in San Diego. On January 8, 1947, she met a 25-year-old married salesman named Robert Red Manley. Manley offered to drive her back to Los Angeles, as she mentioned she was meeting her sister, who was visiting from Boston. On the afternoon of January 9, 1947, Manley dropped Elizabeth off at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Staff and patrons recalled seeing Elizabeth in the hotel lobby, where she made several phone calls and waited for someone. At approximately 6:30 p.m. that evening, Robert Manley watched her walk away from the hotel alone. That moment marked the beginning of what investigators called the missing week. For nearly 6 full days, between the evening of January 9th and the morning of January 15th, Elizabeth Short vanished completely. No verified record, witness, or physical evidence conclusively places her at any specific location during those critical 6 days. Whatever happened during that time frame remains one of the central mysteries of the entire investigation. At approximately 10 a.m. on January 15th, 1947, local resident Betty Berzinger discovered the body in an undeveloped lot on the west side of South Norton Avenue between 39th Street and Coliseum Street. Berzinger ran to a nearby house and phoned the police. Los Angeles Police Department officers arrived within minutes and secured the crime scene. LAPD detectives noted several shocking details immediately. The body had been cut cleanly into 2 separate halves through the abdomen. The corpse was drained of blood, washed clean, and deliberately arranged in the grass. The victim's hands were raised above her shoulders, her elbows were bent at right angles, and her legs were spread wide. Deep lacerations were carved into both sides of her mouth, extending from the corners of her lips toward her ears, a facial disfigurement known medically as a 3D laceration or Glasgow smile. Small tire tracks were discovered near the curb, along with a heel print in the dirt, indicating the killer transported the body to the vacant lot by vehicle under the cover of darkness. The autopsy was conducted on January 16, 1947, by Los Angeles County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Frederick Newbar. The official coroner report documented extensive injuries across the entire body. Dr. Newbar determined that the primary cause of death was hemorrhaging and shock resulting from severe facial lacerations and blunt force trauma to the head and face. The autopsy confirmed that the bisection of the body was performed after death, a procedure known as a hemicorpsectomy. The killer had severed the body between the second and third lumbar vertebrae by cutting through the skin and tissue and breaking the spinal column. Medical examiners noted that the cuts were exceptionally clean, leading investigators to suspect that the perpetrator possessed medical, surgical, or anatomical training. Ligature marks found on her wrists, ankles, and neck showed she had been tied up and tortured prior to her death. Furthermore, examination of her stomach revealed that she had eaten very little during the days leading up to her murder. At the time of the discovery, police had no identification for the young woman. Because her face was disfigured and her body was severed, traditional identification methods were difficult. Detectives turned to fingerprinting. They rolled the victim's fingerprints at the morgue and transmitted them to FBI headquarters in Washington, D.C., using a device known as a sound photo, an early precursor to the modern fax machine. Within 56 minutes, the FBI matched the prints against two existing federal databases. Elizabeth Short had worked as a clerk at the Camp Cook military base in California in 1943, requiring federal civil service fingerprinting. She had been arrested by Santa Barbara police on September 23, 1943, for underage drinking, resulting in an official mugshot and fingerprint record. With the victim officially identified as 22-year-old Elizabeth Short, the LAPD launched what would become one of the most intense manhunts in California history. The media coverage surrounding the case quickly descended into sensationalism. Newspaper publisher William Randolph Hearst and his publication, the Los Angeles Examiner, led the frenzy. Before notifying Elizabeth's family of her death, Examiner reporters called her mother, Phoebe Short, in Massachusetts. They falsely claimed that Elizabeth had won a national beauty contest. Only after extracting personal details, photographs, and childhood stories from the grieving mother did the reporters reveal that her daughter had been brutally murdered. It was also newspaper outlets that popularized the moniker the Black Dahlia. The nickname originated at a drugstore in Long Beach, California, where employees playfully referenced Elizabeth's preferred style of black clothing and hair accessories, combined with the popular 1946 film Noir the Blue Dahlia. Sensationalized headlines falsely depicted Elizabeth as a high society call girl or a transient predator. In reality, police interviews confirmed that she was simply an aspiring young woman struggling to establish a stable life in post-war Los Angeles. On January 24, 1947, 9 days after the body was found, an editor at the Los Angeles Examiner received a mysterious telephone call. The caller stated that he was the killer, expressed disappointment with the newspaper's coverage, and promised to send items belonging to Elizabeth Short in the mail. Reflecting the caller's promise, a manila envelope arrived at the Los Angeles postal station on January 25th, addressed to the newspaper using cutout newsprint letters. The package smelled strongly of gasoline, which the sender had used to wipe down the contents and erase fingerprints. Inside the package were genuine personal belongings of Elizabeth Short: her official birth certificate, social security card, business cards, and personal photographs. An address book with the name Mark Hansen embossed on the cover. On January 26th, Elizabeth's handbag and one of her black shoes were found discarded in an alley 3 miles from where her body was discovered. They had also been wiped clean with gasoline. The Los Angeles Police Department deployed over several hundred officers, led by Captain Jack Donahoe. Detectives tracked down every contact listed in Elizabeth's address book and conducted over 3,000 witness interviews. Due to the intense media coverage, more than 150 individuals came forward claiming to be the killer or confessing to the crime. LAPD investigators systematically interviewed and cleared each false confessor, many of whom were seeking notoriety or suffering from severe mental illness. Initial key suspects included Robert Red Manley, the last known person seen with Elizabeth alive. He submitted to polygraph examinations and provided a verified alibi for the time of the murder, leading to his complete exoneration. Mark Hansen, the owner of the nightclub where Elizabeth stayed briefly and owner of the address book found in the mail package. He was intensely interrogated, but police found no physical evidence linking him to the crime. In late 1949, a Los Angeles County grand jury was convened to investigate the LAPD's failure to solve numerous unsolved murders, including the Black Dahlia case. Documents from the district attorney's office later revealed that investigators had secretly focused on several prominent medical professionals due to the surgical precision of the bisection. One notable suspect was Dr. George Hodel, a physician who ran a clinic specializing in venereal diseases. Following allegations made by his teenage daughter, LAPD placed Hodel under surveillance and secretly bugged his home in early 1950. Wiretaps recorded Hodel making suspicious statements, including, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Despite these troubling statements, police searches yielded no forensic evidence connecting Hodel to Elizabeth Short's murder. Hodel left the United States for the Philippines shortly thereafter and was never charged. Other suspects investigated over the decades included surgeon Dr. Walter Bailey and assistant mortician Leslie Dillon. However, concrete physical evidence, such as matching DNA or fingerprints, was never established for any suspect. As months turned into years, the leads ran dry. Key evidence, including the gasoline-cleansed address book and postal envelope, yielded no usable latent fingerprints. The failure to solve the Black Dahlia murder altered public perception of safety in post-war Los Angeles. It exposed the vulnerabilities of young women migrating to major cities, highlighted the aggressive tactics of mid-century tabloid journalism, and underscored the limitations of forensic science prior to the advent of modern DNA testing. Over the decades, the case inspired dozens of books, true crime documentaries, and feature films. However, much of the pop culture surrounding Elizabeth Short obscured the reality of her life, trading the human tragedy for sensationalized mythology. The murder of Elizabeth Short remains the most famous cold case in the history of Los Angeles. Strip away the sensational headlines, the media myths, and the endless theories, and the heart of the story remains unchanged. A 22-year-old daughter, sister, an aspiring young woman was brutally murdered, her life stolen in a horrific act of violence. Despite thousands of investigative hours logged by generations of LAPD detectives, the identity of the person who walked out of the Leimert Park lot on the cold morning of January 15, 1947, remains unknown. The file on the Black Dahlia remains officially open.